The number one skill I believe every leader should have is called framing. As a matter of fact, it's actually one of the skills I coach one-on-one my clients on. Okay, so framing is probably the most difficult skill to really master. And it's actually a skill that you all the time need to work on, all the time need to improve. It's a skill that you're never done with. It's an always ongoing thing. Framing is not about asking things. Framing is also not about agreeing with your team members. Framing is also not about making concessions and try to find the middle way. No, framing is about setting the standard and aligning your team towards that. That is what framing is about, and that's what this video will be about today, because I really believe that that is just such an important skill to master. And I will try in this video to make it really Mickey Mouse language clear what framing is about, okay? So first of all, I want you to think about what are some of the speeches that you remember most in your life. Speeches maybe that you remember, that we as humanity remember the most, okay? What always comes to my mind is there's one speech of Martin Luther King. I have a dream. Okay, this speech is probably the most memorable speech. Yeah, or there are a few other examples, but let's say I have a dream. This is one of the most known speeches, and if you actually listen to what he says, I have a frame. Okay, he paints a picture of what he thinks is the standard for, in this case, America. Now, why is that such a memorable speech? Well, maybe it's because he was murdered and it gave a lot more emotion towards the speech, and maybe it was also a very difficult time in US back in those days with racism, and it was just very emotionally loaded, and it was like a breakthrough that somebody like Martin Luther King stood there and spoke out what everybody else was keeping inside. Yes, but there was also the aspect of really strong framing. And that is a proof that people, they don't respond to facts. Because the facts were there. Black people were discriminated, fact. There were racism, murders, fact. Government knew that the division was problematic, fact. But despite all those facts, there was no change until there was this frame. Because people respond to frames, they don't respond to facts. If people would respond to facts, then there wouldn't be any problems on the planet. Right? Because we have a fact that there is an issue here. We have a fact that there's an issue there. And the issue persists because there is no clear frame around it. When people would be able to step into a frame, then they, this is what happens in politics, right? It's left and right. There's two different frames. And people step into one frame or step on the other. Or you have people that are from a distance and look at both frames and don't choose to step into one of them. But frames is what people respond to. Marketing essentially is a frame as well, right? But let's go back to leadership, okay? What is this framing about? Well, it's about setting the standards. So if you as a leader, you don't set the standards in the organization, who's going to do it then? When I look into what challenges my clients the most when it comes to framing is that they're walking kind of on eggshells around their people, and they are trying to ask people for favors in a way. Could you do this by then? When could you potentially do this? And although there are instances where that's okay, it's only okay when people know that you as a leader own the frame. And what is that? Owning the frame, right? Well, owning the frame is that people will naturally trust and respect your standards as a leader. Yeah. Now let me give you an example of what a frame is about. Yeah. So I have this client, and in this company, people seem to do only what is necessary. Yeah. So they don't do more than what is part of their job description, if you will. Okay. But for any organization, there should be, and the number is around 20%, 20% of time that people spend in an organization should be focused on stuff that's kind of outside of their daily business and focused on growing, developing, and innovating the future of the business, right? It sits around 20%. So it's very important that people realize, like, I will be able and I will get stuff to do that's outside of my standard day-to-day work. Yeah. But this organization specifically has a lot of troubles in getting people to do that. Now, why is that happening? I've observed this and came to insight almost instantly that the people own the frame, not the leader owns the frame. The people own the frame because they have a list of excuses why they can't do something outside of their standard work that has been for years accepted by leadership. So what happens when leadership constantly accepts that the excuses are valid for not doing something outside of the standard job description? Well, this pattern will continue and people own the frame. They decide whether or not they will do something outside of their standard job. And that's not what leadership is about. Leadership is about owning the frame. A goal is a frame, right? If you think about setting goals is setting frames, right? It's like, this is who we are. And this is how results reflect back who we are. This is how we win. Okay, this is what is our unique sauce, if you will. This is what we offer. This is the frame towards the clients. And this is why it pays off. That's the frame towards what results we're after, right? So they are frames as well. A feedback conversation with your team is a frame. A performance review with your person's one-on-one is reinforcing the frame. Your core values are frames. Your mission, your vision statement are frames. Everything is frames, guys, in leadership. And your job as a leader is to constantly own the frames everywhere. And I make sure that the frames are clear for people, and also make sure that people stay within the frame. Now, I'm not here to make a case that your people are inherently bad and just they don't want to stand within your frames and, they're fighting against you. But it's almost like when you raise kids. Not stating that adults are like kids, or maybe from a psychological perspective, there is something to that. But I'm saying here that if you have a kid that says, I will eat candies before dinner, and you always reinforce that that's happening, then they will never eat dinner before they had their candies. Okay? Because they own the frame. My frame as a kid is, I eat first candies, then I'll eat my dinner. Right? That's their frame. And as a parent, you're stepping into that by actually with your behavior. Okay? So reflect that back to as a leader. When one of your team members says, I'm not doing that because, I don't have the time, or plays a game, like comes up with a whole list of questions instead of actually doing the work. It's ways to show you, like, I'm not stepping into your frame. I'm standing in my frame, is that I'm not doing this. Okay. And without being a bad person towards this, it's not like you have to start forcing people back into your frame, because that's also not what leadership is about. No. Reinforcing the frame is with calm nervous system, centered and calm. And that is, for example, in this specific case of people not wanting to do more than their standard job, could, for example, be like, okay, at our company, everyone in the team contributes around 20% of their time towards tasks and projects that are outside of standard job description. That way, we make sure that we continuously keep evolving, innovating, and developing as a company so that we achieve our desired business result. Okay? That's the frame. That's a very strong frame. I just made it up, actually. And then you would say, like, okay, but yeah, that's nice to state that, but what if people don't agree? Well, it's not about agreeing. It's great if people agree. That's awesome. But alignment is not the same as agreeing. Okay? Agreeing is like, yeah, I see it the same way, let's do it. Aligning is like, okay, I understand that you see it that way. I might see it different, but I realize that this is the way how things are done, so I'm stepping into it. Okay? You see, there's no concessions there also. Now, what happens then when people are not wanting to step into your frame? Well, that's amazing, because you have very, very concrete feedback material. Feedback is probably a whole separate video, as well as alignment and agreement, as well as the goals statements that I just mentioned, the frames around goals. Those are all future videos. But for this video is, where do you actually step into the frames of your people, right? Where do you actually let go of your standard and you're stepping into the standard of people? Can you not create standard together in an organization? Of course you can. There are frames that you develop together with your people. But still it's up to the leader to make sure that the frame is reinforced. Do you always have to neglect somebody else's frame and say, no, it's always my frame. I have a big ego and I'm never listening to other people's frames. No, also not. Of course you allow other people to bring their frame. Maybe their frame is the new standard for the company. But then it's still you as a leader that has to reinforce the frame and keep the frame alive. Okay? So that is absolutely, if not the most powerful skill that you can develop as a leader, is to constantly think in terms of frames. Now, ask yourself, where do you let go of your power as a leader? Where are your frames not reinforced? Have a thought about it. Let me know in the comments where you feel like you're, losing your frame sometimes, or where you find it difficult to be stricter in your frame. Because in the end, it's all about wording. Okay? I coach people one-on-one. I do offer right now, for a limited time, I don't know how long yet, I offer free weekly group coaching. Okay? There's a link here in the description. You can go there. It gets you to the school platform. This is where I host the calls. And have a look there. If you want to join on weekly group calls, it's like an hour. I can coach you on the spot on any challenges that you have around framing, and that way help you on your journey as a growing and developing leader, because we're never done learning as leaders. See you on the other side.